Coming up on Discode, the definitive answer when it comes to software architecture. Music on the show is from artist Quintas Moreira. Let's start with a little bit of a personal update. Today and the last week and a half, I've been sort of dealing with a lot of re-architecting some of our data and some of our modeling around login and profiles and things like that for people in our system at work. So I've been wrestling a little bit with Hibernate and JPA, trying to get exactly how we're persisting data, because this is all sort of new. And I heard a podcast while I was working on this, Coding Blocks. They were talking about the pragmatic programmer and programming by coincidence, which you never really want to do, because you can get something working, but if you don't know how it works, then you don't know how to use it the next time, or how to use what you learn the next time. You don't know how to fix it. You don't know why it's broken. So I just thought it was pretty funny that for a little while there I was programming by coincidence with Hibernate, but now got to step back and really understand what's going on, and I've been doing that. It's been a little bit difficult because there aren't a lot of good resources, but that's what I've been up to. On to quality code and the tip. The only way you can truly define what your system will need and look like is to get decision makers in the room and explain your architecture plan. It will definitely change by doing this, but at least it won't be as wrong. Now, it'll even change after you do this, but if you get enough people together that have opinions about the way things should look, then at least you'll be closer. That's the tip. Now, the main topic today is going to be about design, which in this case means architecture design. This is the second step in quality code. Now, I promised a definitive answer at the beginning, and that definitive answer is, it depends. I know, not a definitive answer. I'm going to go over a few different aspects of architecture that you might want to think about, or just some examples. There are probably umpteen number of other ones that I'm not going to touch on, but I'm going to talk about a few. I wouldn't call myself an expert on any of these, but knowing that they exist is a great step in the right direction, and having experience with a few to know their drawbacks and their advantages is also great. So that's what I'm going to go off here. The first one is component-based. This is something that's pretty hot with React these days, with the front-end design, but it also is huge in the back end with microservices. So it's a vertical functionality that can be split into layers. If you're talking about, for example, login, you've got a UI component that talks to a login controller, possibly, that talks to a login service, maybe, that interacts with the login data store. Or you might have something that with not as many layers. Again, microservices. But it also applies to the front end. I think there's the major drawback of this is the complexity. If you're trying to get a holistic system together that does something, it's a lot of separate deployables and concerns that need to work together. You need to develop contracts, make sure people are aligning with the contracts, which I've found in the past to be very difficult. Sometimes people don't know the concept of a contract, or that they're breaking theirs, so that's somewhat difficult. Again, this is a pretty common theme with software. It's more of a people problem than a technology problem. So the second one, or two, are monolithic or client server. I lump these together because they're so closely related. Now, they're not always closely related, but the client server model, you've got a client talking to a server. Usually that's, and they're usually very tightly linked, and that's usually in a monolith. So you got the monolith with the client and the server built in. It is essentially like the last one. It's a component, it's a component model, but it's where all the components are lumped together. So they all mingle and meld and get all squished and make it difficult to change things that you can without breaking everything else or making unintended changes. But the real advantage of this, and this is why you see it all the time, is that it's really easy to get started. So one project I worked on in the past started out with this model, a monolith, as a proof of concept, which is all great. I mean, this is perfect for that. You stand up Spring Boot application, you have everything from front to back, data, server, service, UI, everything. You have everything. But then once you get to a certain point, you should re-architect it and build it again. But that doesn't always happen, which is not happened in the last few of these situations I've been in. The third area of styles, I guess I will dive into is the event-driven, and I'll lump in serverless model with this. They're usually synonymous with each other. I mean, event-driven doesn't have to be serverless, obviously, but these days, serverless, event-driven, they kind of have the same meaning, whether or not that's correct. The basics of it is you just have some structure of sending and receiving messages, usually a stream of some kind. I mean, AWS examples, SNS. You have certain aspects of the application that create these messages. They say, this thing happened, here you go. Or, yeah, that's basically it. I mean, the great thing about this is the simplicity to wrap your head around it. You're just reacting to events. You're creating events, you're reacting to events. That's it. But the complexity and the problem comes in with a couple different aspects. The complexity, this is similar to the microservice model. You got to make sure everything is in the right place, has its subscriptions all set up, is creating the right events with the right contracts. But everything lives on its own and subscribes to only the events it cares about, which is great because it's easy to wrap your head around one small thing that's only supposed to do one thing. And the other downside of this is the human interaction would be asynchronous in this case. So one example would be, say you had a system that is creating in-person events, like managing these types of events that you go to in person, and you want to sign up to one so you have a place to show up to it with. So they know you're coming, or they have capacity for you, those kinds of things. So in this model, if you wanted to sign up, you wouldn't get an immediate reaction to it. You wouldn't be at a website and say, sign up, and say, oh, you got a spot. What would happen is, and this happens with some of these systems that exist now, is that you would say, I want to request a spot. Okay, your request is in. And then sometime later, maybe just seconds, you get another message back, like an email, SMS, something like that. So you would send your event asynchronously. You'd send it using the front end as an event, and there'd be some service in the back end that is looking for those events, and then processes it and checks to see if you have space and if you're capable of attending this event. And then it would probably send a message off to another system that receives messages for sending SMS or something like that. And then that system will actually send the SMS to you. So it's a roundabout way, but it makes it sometimes less complicated to, well, at least for one thing, provide performance, but also just to get the system all wrapped into one, so to speak. It's not really wrapped into one. It's a little hard to explain, but it's a good model, especially if you have a good sized team to deal with it that can all take different pieces. Next, I'd like to explore a couple different patterns that are fairly common. MVC is the first one. It's a fairly simple pattern. It's not necessarily the easiest one to develop in, I don't think, because especially if you're trying to separate concerns and to really strip down the layers in software, and I won't go into that this time, but MVC is basically you have a controller that is doing all, it's kind of the brains of the system, and it manipulates the model, which is the data, piece and creates a rendered view so that the view, well, creates a render basically, so that the view can display the model. So it's kind of this weird circular, half circular pattern where the controller updates the model and the view displays the model, but the view also accepts the design of the view essentially from the controller. So it's anyway, that's why it's kind of complicated. It's not a super simple pattern to explain even, so it's a little bit difficult to develop in. The other one I want to explore is domain-driven design, or DDD. And this isn't really the same kind of entity or the same kind of idea as MVC, but it's a very important idea to try and strive for. I would say that any situation where we talk about DDD or people know about DDD, it just never happens the way it should, or it just doesn't happen at all. But DDD is basically that all aspects of the system have their place and are defined using ubiquitous language and strict boundaries. And by ubiquitous language, I mean that when you're talking about a word that's supposed to define a concept, it means that concept and that concept only, and there's no other word for it. But within a boundary, obviously there are only so many words in the English language, but when you're talking about an area of your software, then you want to put a boundary around it and you want to define the concepts using ubiquitous language. Somewhat of a hard word to say. But there are plenty of books, plenty of people to talk about it. So it's just something to know about and something that you should have a little bit of depth of knowledge, just so when it does come up, you know about it. And I just want to say that everything along these lines has their own positives, negatives, their own drawbacks, their own wins. But the only way to win this architecture battle is knowing what your choices are, what's good about them, what's bad about them, so you can choose the one you need for the situation. Let's go into week in review. So my personal / business life, I'm still working on creating a course. I've finished the thank you page. It's going more slowly than I really wanted it to, but it's a little bit difficult to learn all these new tools as well as a new process, and trying to come up with content, and there are a lot of things to worry about, so it's just a lot of stuff to take in, so it's kind of slowly happening. I'm developing an email sequence this week, which is the next step. I want to provide meaningful and valuable content to people that sign up to my list. I don't want to provide stuff that's not relevant or the stuff that is not that valuable, like you can get anywhere. I want to provide something that has some real guts to it, has something that people can really take away and use. That's mainly what it is. Real useful content. So the idea is that when somebody signs up, you want to warm them up by giving them content that lets them know what you're all about and gives them value. So the first step is to provide the lead magnet, which I talked about last time, I believe. Send them an email with that lead magnet in it, and then follow that up with a survey asking what's your biggest problem, what are you looking for a solution for, based on this small aspect, this niche. And then the third is to provide some value, basically some content related to that. And then after that, kind of weekly, and these are daily. The first three are daily. So you got 1 day later, 2 day later, 3. And then after 3, you're talking like weekly, just content about you, getting to know you or providing value, kind of going back and forth, shuffling it up. It's just fun stuff, Keep it short, keep it sweet, keep it useful, keep it fun, whatever. So that's what I'll be working on more next. And then I'll continue on to some more steps, which I will go into next time. Now, the blog part it's going really well. I'm glad about that. I circled around many different, I think I talked about this last time, going into different platforms, different ways of putting a blog up. I started with Sanity and Sapper. I just had a problem with it because there was a bit more development than I wanted to do. I just really wanted to write a blog. And then I ended up with all these out-of-the-box systems that were either too cumbersome to use or they just didn't work. Like I lost an entire blog post one time when I was posting to one of the platforms. So I went back to Sapper and Sanity, and I had a much better time this time. Really committed to developing tiny little bits at once. I would not say my site is pretty right now, and I would not say my blog is great, but it's getting better. So you just iterate. And the main focus I've had in podcasting today and this week is to try and tighten things up and stop babbling, give myself some limits, and provide better written copy I can go off of, which is the show notes, which you can find at discode.dev. For this one, discode.dev/001.md. I will provide an index page, so all you have to do at some point is go to discode.dev, but iterations. Now let's get into kits. I haven't come up with a new kit to add, but I've added everything that I've thought of currently, and I'm going to continue to add more as soon as I can provide a little bit of time to myself to update these. So I have a coder kit and I have a cook kit, so I'm going to continue to sort of walk that line between coding and everything else. But you can check out my kits at kit.com/JeffreyFate. Thanks for joining me for another episode of Discode, and I will talk to you guys in a week.